I take forward this conversation with the former Foreign Secretary, Shringla. Mr. Shringla, thank you very much for joining us on this very special broadcast. And who better to take this conversation forward, because you played a very important role during the G20 summit. In fact, a lot was spoken about what's going to happen with regards to the joint communique and the fact that India has been advocating that peace is the only way forward, dialogue is the only way forward. Let me then ask you this question, Mr. Shringla, that the perception, the growing perception with the Prime Minister essentially choosing Russia as the first country for his bilateral talks, breaking the template that most prime ministers have had in the past of choosing the first neighboring country. The significance of it, Mr. Shringla, that I want to first begin with.
Thank you, Shawan. We have to see Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia from a primarily bilateral lens. Since the year 2000, India and Russia have had annual bilateral summits at the leaders level. So far, we've had 21 such summits. This is the 22nd summit that Prime Minister Modi has gone for. In December 2021, President Putin came to India for the last such annual bilateral summit. It's been 2.5 years since, and a visit by Prime Minister Modi to Moscow was overdue. But India also has very important interests when it comes to our relationship with Russia. We rely on Russia for about 60% of our defense platforms. There is a need to try and streamline the logistics of supplies of spares and other components for these defense platforms in Russia. In addition to this, we are working with Russia on new systems such as naval frigates, the SSN submarine project. These are important both from a defense standpoint and technological exchange standpoint. We also import a very substantial quantity of oil from Russia at very, very competitive prices. In the last year alone, we have imported about $60 billion of oil from Russia. So Russia is a very important partner in our energy, sourcing. And of course, it is important to note that we have a very significant adverse trade balance because we are importing far more from Russia than Russia is importing for us. There is an adverse trade balance of about $60 billion. And we need to work with Russia to see how we can facilitate more access to the Russian market for our agricultural products, our automobile components, our engineering goods, our pharmaceuticals. But at the same time, examine an option of rupee-ruble trade to facilitate a greater amount of Russian investments into India. We also have an interest in the North-South international corridor, which will connect us to Russia through Central Asia. We are also looking at operationalizing the Vladivostok-Chennai shipping link, and which gives us also access to huge resources that are opening up in the Arctic. There are lots of interests involved in this relationship, and I think we need to look at that in this context. But more than that, I think Prime Minister's mission to Russia has been a mission of peace. I mean, look how many world leaders can go to Russia and talk to President Putin about issues that are very, very relevant to the entire world today, particularly the global south. After all, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has not confined itself to Europe. It's had an impact across the world. So when Prime Minister Modi can go to Russia and tell President Putin that peace and not war is the solution, that peace is not possible from the battlefield, and it's only possible through dialogue, or that he can express that our hearts bleed when we see innocent children dying, I think the message there is a strong message for peace. Prime Minister Modi has had very candid conversations with President Putin. That's very evident from the press conference that took place between the two leaders. Right. And I think there is some frank talking in that regard. So we have to, I think, see from that context that we are a country that has been very strongly invested in peace through dialogue and diplomacy. Prime Minister Modi has put his own personal, let's say, reputation online for this, in fact, and you can see that in action.
Mr. Shringla, what I also want to, perhaps focus on is the imagery here. On the one hand, you have President Putin and Prime Minister Modi with that, as the Prime Minister calls it, a frank conversation that took place On the other hand, in Washington, D.C., you would have the NATO leaders coming together, celebrating what they've called the anti-Russia alliance. The fact of the matter is this, that today NATO has been largely weakened. The very fact that if President Trump comes back to power, it would essentially mean that NATO loses its significance to a greater extent. So what's the opposition? Because, Mr. Shringla, if you see the kind of responses that have come in, and I would like to read few of them. The US Department of State says that India is a strategic partner with whom we engage in a full and frank dialogue, and that includes on our concerns about the relationship with Russia. It does appear at some level, Mr. Shringla, that the West is going through a complete meltdown.
Look, we have a very good relationship with the United States and many of our friends from the West. You recall that Prime Minister Modi took his first visit to the G7 summit, where he interacted extensively with Western leaders. He had a very successful visit to the United States last year. But let me put it this way. India is a country of subcontinental proportions. We have the largest population in the world. We are the fifth largest economy in the world. We are the fastest growing major economy in the world. We are a vibrant democracy. So for us, strategic autonomy is not an option. It is an imperative. And Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia has to be seen as a manifestation of the exercise of that policy of strategic autonomy. And I think, as I mentioned, we have strong interests there. Prime Minister Modi follows a policy of India first. And I think, considering the context, the global context today, most countries seem to be following the same policy. And so everybody has to obviously be aware of his and their own interests. And we are not doing anything different. But an India first policy where our national interests are have primacy over any other factor is there. But as I said, at the same time, we are looking at this from a point of view of world peace. We are trying to contribute to a situation where we're trying to bring an end to war and bring in and usher in peace. And that is, I would say, the requirement or the demand of most countries in the world. The global South definitely would like to see, more focus on issues such as the economy, controlling inflation, dealing with indebtedness, poverty, the SDGs, for example, rather than on conflict. This is, as Prime Minister Modi said, this is not an era of war.
Right.
And we don't believe that, conflict can resolve our issues. We believe in our traditional policy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and how the world should really act as one family and sit down together and work out what is really essentially issues that can be resolved.
Well, Mr. Shringla, I just want you to stay on with us because I would like to show this, and this is a question that I'll also take with you while we take the graphics that we have just put across. This is with regards to why exactly is the West really responding in the manner it has so far. And Mr. Shringla, I'll just come to you, but I'll just run this through. Now, why it irks the West, this is what President Putin had to say. You've dedicated your whole life to the people of your country and the citizens know it. Let's take you through the other reasons why we believe that this is somewhere down the line the irritant for the West. I appreciate the efforts of President Putin towards strengthening the ties between the two countries. That's what Prime Minister Modi had to say. Let's take you through some more comments that have been made. Prime Minister Modi had said that we have met each other 17 times so far. All these meetings have led to an increase in trust and respect between us. That's the Prime Minister once again making that comment. If I can just bring back Mr. Shringla on this entire point. Mr. Shringla, we've just put out the kind of responses that have come in from President Putin as well as Prime Minister Modi. But a straight question that I want to ask you, what is it that prevents NATO countries or the West, the kind of reservation that they have had with the Prime Minister's visit to Russia?
Well, I think, it is a question of looking in from their perspective. From their point of view, obviously, there are reservations that are there. From our point of view, we believe that we have the right to conduct a foreign policy that regards, countries, all countries as partners, as interlocutors. As I mentioned, we as a large country, as a country which is a growing power, it is definitely in our interest to conduct a policy of strategic autonomy where we have the options. We are not in one camp or the other. We are working for the larger global common good. We are working for our national interests. Remember that India is one of the few countries that is not only a regular invitee to G7 meetings, we are a member of the Quad. We also participate in meetings of BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We straddle that ideological space, as I've mentioned before, between North and South and East and West. And we are one of the few countries that have the equities that can enable us to talk both to the West and Russia with equal comfort. And Prime Minister Modi's stature as a world leader today allows him the ability to be able to go and engage with leaders across the globe and across the ideological divide. And I think today that is what is needed. I mean, earlier you had leaders like President Macron, you had other leaders that tried to do some form of mediation, shuttle diplomacy. And I think most of these today are, no longer happening for various reasons. And one of them is, of course, the lack of, I would say, equity on both sides. What Prime Minister Modi has is not only respect; he is respected, by President Biden and President Putin alike. He's respected from the West and in the East alike. And he has the ability to go out and talk world peace. He has the ability to go and say that this is not an era of war. And he has the ability to say, how can I contribute to bringing about, bringing about an end to conflict? How can we contribute and use our good offices to bring sides together? And I don't see very many other countries doing it. So I think NATO and the West has to appreciate it from that context, that, this is an effort which very few others can actually do. And if you're serious about bringing about peace, you have the Switzerland initiative, but that wasn't very successful because it didn't have all parties on board. Then you have to have the stature of Prime Minister Modi engage all concerned. And I think that should be encouraged and not discouraged. That's my view.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Shringla, for joining us.